Okay, so where are we going? We're going to go to a mental map, okay? What are mental maps? Well, mental maps are frameworks, okay, that give us the construct of ultimately what we need to do. And once we have a mental map, it gives us the opportunity to break rules. So as you've all heard this statement, you have to learn the rules before you can break them. And the problem with medicine is that there are a tremendous amount of steps. And if you don't follow those steps in a linear order, well, you don't learn them. And the problem is that we often get distracted by a patient. Yeah, the patient's like, they're always distracting us with their problems. And we have this mental map that we have to work through. And we're like, would you just calm down for a second? I got stuff to do here. And they're like, yeah, but I got this problem. And then we start dealing with the problem and we don't follow through with all the items. And the other thing I'm going to remind you is that as we start to get into this mental map of all the items that we have to cover, recognize that you have to defeat your bias, which is that the patient is going to distract you, but you still have to get through this in a linear order, okay? Once you get it down in a linear order, then you get to deal with problems that are out of order, because then you'll know where to come back to in the map. And so until you learn the process, you're not allowed to go off script, okay? So we call this mental map the patient assessment system. And it's so slyly shortened into the PAS. I mean, it's brilliant, right? You guys will get my jokes later on. Okay, I'll give you time to warm up to them. There's 4 parts to the PAS. There's 4 parts. And so the first part is what we refer to as the scene survey. The second part is what we call the primary survey. The third is what we refer to as the secondary survey. I don't know about you folks, but I'm definitely voting that the next time Webster's puts out another edition that secondary starts getting spelled this way. Only makes sense, right? And then 4 is the rescue survey. Now, what do you need to know about these right now? So this is big picture, because there's a lot of items that are associated with each one of these surveys. So big picture. Big picture, scene survey. Scene survey is about safety and resources. Okay, so it's a resource allocation, okay? Our primary survey, okay, is we're looking to find, stop, and fix life threats. So we find them. If we find a life threat, we stop and fix it before we move on, okay? After we conduct a primary survey, we then go into the secondary survey. And the secondary survey is about trends, assessment. Somebody fart? And treatment. That or it was an Amber Alert, I'm not sure which. So trends, assessment, and treatment. Rescue survey. This is about transportation, and evacuation. So the methods we're going to use in order to be able to move a patient out of the environment. Okay. Now, what I would like you to do is I would like you to turn to page 24 in your book. Turn to page 24 in your book. And what that brings us to on page 24 brings us up to this scene survey, okay? And so, Cora, do you mind reading for me under scene survey? There's going to be 6 steps that they have in the book that outline what the scene survey is. Can you read that aloud for everybody? Are you safe? I just get a kick out of it. Anytime I read something that uses the same word over and over and over and over again, I'm like, what's going on here, right? Because they're talking about safety, and then they talk. There's a lot of stress on safety, and then what's the other thing? We talk about BSI, and then what are the other things? Forming a general impression, okay? So we do a slightly different take on this. We're going to interpret it we're going to add some art to the science, okay? And so we're going to outline here a scene survey, okay? Scene survey. And the only thing we're going to do that's different is we're going to add a 7th step. But what you're going to see is we're going to incorporate all of the things that they just talked about in those 6 steps. We're going to give you action items with 7 steps. So we're actually going to give you not only a concept, but we're going to give you a thing to manage or a decision to make, okay, to help you work through a scene survey. Now, 7 steps. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce all 7 steps to you, and then I'm going to come back and get into the details of them in order for us to better understand what this scene survey is really all about. Okay? So in our scene survey, the way we interpret this, the first thing that we incorporate here is BSI. Okay? What is BSI? So BSI is what we refer to as body, substance, isolation. Okay? Body, substance, isolation. Now, this is a safety concern because basically what body, substance, isolation is about, it's about a barrier between us and them. Okay? It's a barrier between us and them. I'm going to keep it pretty simple because I'm going to come back into this. I'm going to go into pretty good detail with this. But right now, basically what we need to know is that we're trying to protect ourselves from pathogens from individuals when we're coming in contact with them, okay? So body, substance, isolation, so that's number 1. So number 2 is scene safety, okay? Scene safety, and so the question is it safe? No, it's not safe. Nothing is safe, right? I mean, if we were looking for safety, we would lock ourselves in this room, and we would never leave. And the reality of it is that there's a risk associated with everything that we do, okay? The other thing I like to talk about in regards to this whole idea of scene safety is the fact that if you've had an accident occur that is because of a terrain hazard, for instance, like rockfall. So if rockfall has occurred, what is most likely to continue to occur? Rockfall, right? So can we stop that? No. if somebody gets hit by rockfall, who is normally involved in an interaction with rockfall? Climbers, imagine that, right? What do climbers normally take with them? Helmets. So they're actually prepared to deal with the actual hazard. So I joke about this a little bit from the standpoint where it's like, if you're interacting with a particular activity, well, you need to have the appropriate PPE in order to be able to interact in that environment. And if you don't have the appropriate PPE, for instance, if you're on the river, what are you always gonna have? PFD, right? Because you are worthless in cold water without a PFD. So the point is you're actually more willing to take risks in those environments. I'm not suggesting that we don't size up those risks, although the reality of it is for instance, when I came on to search and rescue, the thing I found out in a very big hurry is that we never turned down a mission. We would often figure out a way to engage with the risk. And then there were just some times where, as an incident commander, they would look at me or my crew, or I would look at a crew and ask the question, you guys willing to take on the job? I've never had anybody turn it down, okay? Because that's kind of what they signed up for, and that's what we all sign up for when we go into the outdoors. So just like to recognize where it's like, we can manage this a little bit, but generally we take some precautions, but the reality is we expose ourselves to the same risks that the individual was injured in, okay? And it's simply because we've already accepted that risk because we've decided to interact with the activity. And now, because it's a fellow user, we're more likely to take on that risk in order to be able to support somebody else, okay? So scene safety, BSI scene safety. 3, the question is number of patients. Oh, I lied. BSI scene, oh yeah. BSI scene safe, nope, I lied. It's not number of patients. It's BSI scene safe, consider backup. Okay. Consider backup. Did I just do that? I just did it out of order, didn't I? Yeah, okay, never mind. My bias is getting in my way. I lied. It's not consider backup. That's 4. It is number of patients. Ah, my brain. So number 3, number of patients. Okay. I get a call from dispatch. I'm working with search and rescue. Get a call from dispatch. And we come in on a conference call with dispatch. They give us the size up. And they say, we have a party of 4. Within that group, we have an individual who has a lower leg injury. How many patients do I have? So good, you guys are on point. Exactly, so everybody within a group is considered a patient until they prove otherwise, okay? So ultimately, we treat everybody because survivors oftentimes have some type of emotional distress that is causing them to actually show signs and symptoms of shock and oftentimes become a threat to the scene or themselves. And so we treat everybody within a group as a patient until they prove otherwise. I'll talk about this more in detail as well. Number of patients. Number 4, consider backup, okay? Consider backup. In the simplest form, this is 911. Everybody used to get on my tail about this. Like I always use 911 as a backup, and everybody's like, we're in the backcountry, we don't have cell service. I'm like, yeah, but you have to get to it eventually. Like somebody, and who are you gonna call? You're not calling Ghostbusters, right? You're calling 911. And so this is our out. And the question with the scene survey is are we considering calling 911 just based off of the size up, meaning without interaction with the patient? Okay? Meaning, for instance, several years ago in the park, I watched a rock fall happen. 3 people got caught carried in the rock slide that occurred with it, and one person disappeared in the talus slope as we watched them. We didn't need to get there to be like, we need more help. There was actually 22 calls that went into dispatch that day before anybody even got to the patient. And because of that, we got an elevated response from the park. We actually had a helicopter on scene within 15 minutes. So based off of the size up, the early 911 initiated more personnel on scene than what would normally show up. Okay, BSI, scene safe, number of patients considered backup. Number 5 is MOI versus NOI. What is this? This is, so mechanism of injury. Mechanism of injury is MOI. Nature of illness is NOI. So what is this? This is trauma versus medical. Okay, trauma versus medical. And ultimately what we're trying to ask ourselves is what type of treatment protocol are we going to provide the individual based off of what we believe the size up to be. For instance, am I having an NOI or an MOI? NOI, right? Nature of illness, okay? Because no mechanism acted on me, okay? But for instance, if you see somebody here going, MOI, right? So we had a mechanism, they fell, and now we have a musculoskeletal injury. So trauma versus medical. Trauma, we normally find and fix it. Medical, we've got to dig in and we have to do a little bit more interviewing. So we have different treatment protocols that are associated with this, so they drive us into a different decision-making format. And then if we have an MOI, the question that we're asking after this is consider spinal precautions. Consider spinal precautions, meaning do I need to hold the head, okay? Has there been a significant deceleration, okay, in an effort to be able to cause enough harm to the head, neck, or spine that would cause me to want to take considerations about supporting the head, neck, and spine and trying to reduce further injury. And then the last thing here is general impression. Now, general impression is simply our opinion of the scene survey in terms of the treatment protocol we're going to have. And so, for instance, on that rock fall that we saw that turned into a rock slide and we saw 3 people get caught, 1 person disappeared into the talus. So the scene size up that I had with my partner that day as we were coming in, as we saw the incident, was, he looked at me and he goes, do you have belay gloves with you? He knew I had my helmet because we were climbing, but he was like, do you have your belay gloves with you? And I was like, I actually do. Meaning, do I have leather gloves in order to be able to go into a rock fall situation, okay? He was definitely thinking not outside of the box, completely inside of the box based off of what the incident was. He's like, I know you have a helmet, do you have leather gloves? I was like, yeah, I do. He's like, probably gonna need them. And he looked at me, he goes, you do want to go up there? I was like, yeah, I'm not missing this show. He was like, awesome. And I said, we'll need to reassess the scene when we get there to see if it's even safe enough to go in, because we could be in a completely unstable environment that we could trap ourselves into if we move into it too quickly. So we'll reassess the scene as we get closer. We knew we had at least 1 seriously injured individual, and we were assuming that we had 3 people that were injured. Backup, we were calling 911. We knew we had an MOI, but I turned around and looked at him and I said, that guy that's buried in, the person that's buried in the rocks, I said, we need to be thinking about hypothermia. He looked at me and he said, you're right. Because when rocks break, they're cold, and then when you get trapped in rocks, you get cold, and then if you've got soft tissue injuries and you're bleeding, you get cold. And so I was like, we actually need to be aware of hypothermia too. So yeah, we do have an MOI. We'll consider spinal after we move the person because we got to get them to a safe environment first before we have to worry about head, neck, or spine. So our general impression was that we had the appropriate equipment to be able to get over there and reassess the scene and decide if it was going to be safe enough. We had already initiated backup. We would like to, we're going to treat for trauma and assume that there's going to be some environmental medical problems with it. And we need to move slow once we get over there. We need to communicate very clearly as a team. And so that was our general impression, meaning we come up with an opinion and then we're ready to be wrong once we get over there as we get more information. Because every time you come up onto a scene, you have to be a researcher and come up with a hypothesis and then be willing to be wrong in order to error correct yourself in the right way, okay? So scene survey. This is going to be rote for you within 2 days. You're literally going to be walking up and you're going to go, BSI, is my scene safe? Looks safe enough. Number of patients, looks like I got one. Consider backup? I'll wait until I get more information before I call 911. I have an unknown, I think it's trauma, so I'm going to take spinal precautions. My general impression is that I have somebody face down not helping themselves, and that's likely not a good situation. So that's literally what you're going to be walking yourself through. Now, let me back up a little bit, and I want to go up to BSI here. And we're going to dive into this a little bit deeper. And what we're going to do here with BSI is we're going to talk about a few things in regards to what is BSI. So we said it's a barrier between us and them. What are these things? Okay, so gloves. What else? Okay, could be a mask. Goggles. Eye protection. Anything else? Okay, I'll dig that. Gloves, mask, eye protection. Okay, now, why do we wear gloves? Okay, bodily fluids. Okay, great. Okay. Why else do we wear gloves?
Disease transmission.
Okay, how? This is really important.
Through contact.
Okay, through contact. Okay, so let's play a little bit of a game here. What fluid are we most worried about? Blood. What pathogen? Okay, so let's just go there. Okay, blood. So, blood. What are we most worried about in regards to contact with blood? That we bring it into what? Our what? Our blood system. How does that occur? Okay, so if you have an open wound. Okay. What if I told you that that was a bias that you were taught? Okay, okay, epic. So, in hospital, what's the most common way to get infected with blood? Boom, needles. Okay, excellent, excellent. Okay, so let's back up here. What pathogen are we most worried about in blood? Oh, I like that. Hep. What else is scary? HIV/AIDS. Okay, let's play this game. HIV/AIDS. How is it transmitted? Okay. What user group transmits AIDS, HIV? Everybody gets quiet on me all of a sudden. Okay, sexually active. Specifically, what type of sexual acts? Homosexual sex? Okay. What if I told you that is all complete bullshit bias? Okay. So, let me help you understand bias. So in the 80s, there's a few of us that were around for this mess. And what happened is AIDS just kind of pops up out of nowhere. We're like, this is weird. What's going on here? And does anybody know what they told us?
God's way of killing the fat.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for playing. I love playing. Thank you for playing ball. Okay, so we get this message. That's like, whoa, we have a homosexual community that's spreading AIDS, and the heterosexual community. You guys need to wear a what? Protection. Need to wear a condom, right? Okay. Now, here's the problem. This is what we knew a year and a half later after we were told, wear a condom. And then they went so far as to tell us, you know what? In fact, it's so horrible, you shouldn't even have sex. You should just abstain. That's what they told us. And then a year and a half later, this is what we found out. Who transmits AIDS? Nope. No, well, bingo. Which ones? Needle users. Now here, and then they also went after another population. So they went after the homosexual population, and then they went after another minority. Yeah.
Haitians.
Blacks. But they did go after Haitians as well. It's interesting because there are some sanitary conditions that were associated with the problem that goes on in Haiti. So it's not as clean as the rest of what I'm about to talk about doesn't work quite as well with Haiti because there are some extreme conditions that exist there. I worked in Haiti. Oh my, you can't believe it. It's such a broken system. So what we found out is that needle users were transmitting AIDS. Okay, and they were sharing needles. Okay, now the problem is that when we found that out, CNN didn't come out and go, hey, by the way, we were ostracizing the gay population and they're actually not the problem. It's actually needle users within these populations that are transmitting AIDS into the population through needles. And then, as I like to remind folks, if you know anything about the one kind of heterosexual, who's the heterosexual hallmark for HIV? Magic Johnson. How many tries did he have to play in order to get HIV? Do you know what the number was? He was stating, he wrote a book about it, 10,000 women. Something tells me that one of those women was a needle user. And maybe, I don't know, but here's what I do know is you bleed out, you don't bleed in, okay? And then what is the most common heterosexual transmitted disease through sex? That is true, and it's interesting because for women it's terribly compromising. For men and women, what's the bloodborne, you call it? It's hepatitis. So if you're gonna wear a condom, the reason why you wear a condom is for Hep C, HPV too, okay? And what's interesting is that your likelihood, it's interesting because I ran into this because in 1991, I had a girlfriend who was like, you need to go get tested for AIDS. And I was like, okay, fine. Because she was like, if you want to get jiggy, this is the only way it's going to happen. And I was like, I'm down. Take it. Take my blood. I'm in. And my doctor looked at me and you know what he said to me? He goes, I already tell you what the answer is. He goes, you don't? He goes, there's no way. And I go, why not? And he looked at me and he goes, wrong culture. And I looked at him and I go, it's a sexually transmitted disease. He looked at me and he goes, do you use needles? And I looked at him and I go, what are you talking about? He looked at me and he goes, that's what we're trying to deal with here. He goes, this is not a rampant sexually transmitted disease unless you're using needles. I was like, oh, huh, okay. So don't get me wrong, blood's scary and it's gross and you don't want to touch it. And yes, is there the potential to transmit through cuts? There is. It's lower probability. It's much higher if you stick something into somebody else that's a needle, pull their blood out, and then put it into you. Okay? And then the other reality of it is it's like, well, why do we wear gloves? Okay, here's the interesting piece: sterilizing who from who? It's you to you, and you to the patient. Because do you know how you infect yourself? By touching what? So when you put gloves on, what are you less likely to do? Bingo. Yeah. Do you know why we wear masks? Because when you wear gloves, you will touch your face with the mask on, but you won't have direct contact with your face. I hate to tell you, but you can put a mask on and you can breathe through it all you want. You know what you find inside the mask? Bacteria. There's no viruses. Why? Because viruses are smaller than bacteria and they go through the mask. So I'm not saying that, no, I am saying it. So there's policy and then there's research. But the reality of it is that respiratory is not the problem with the mask. The mask is trying to stop you from touching your face. Why? Because you touch your face about 30 times an hour. Okay? So there's a bigger story to it all, which was you should wash your hands more regularly. You should not touch your face. And you should start dealing with your immune system, because 94.7% of all fatalities in COVID were who? Do you know this? Obese. And then you've got heart disease and diabetes that runs parallel with that. Okay? So again, I'm not saying that the prevention was completely wrong, but it's not the whole story as to what's happening. And then how well did those protections work? Everybody got COVID, right? So let's play this game a little bit, okay? Because you have what we refer to as the pathogen puzzle, and if you do not have all four pieces of the puzzle compromised, pathogens can't affect you, okay? And then I'm going to show you what we can control in this puzzle and what we have little control over. And so, presence, we don't have much control over, because pathogens are either present or they're not. And once they're present, not much we can do about it, okay? And so presence, we don't get to decide whether they're present or not, okay? Although quantity comes into play here, and quantity is important because when individuals are symptomatic, okay, you're spreading more of a viral load. That's what the signs and symptoms are showing us is that you have the capacity to push more of a viral load out, so there's a higher level of presence of the pathogens when people are symptomatic, okay? With that being said, generally it's a bad idea to be around a bunch of sick people. Why? Because that presence can get large enough in order to overwhelm your immune system, no matter how strong your immune system is. So this was also the problem with COVID, which was that everybody was getting it, and so the likelihood of trying to get around it was nearly impossible because there was too much presence and quantity at the same time, okay? Now, the next piece that comes into this is route. And route, as I already told you, is generally we infect ourselves. We infect ourselves because what we do is we touch other things, we touch other people, and then we touch our face, and then we put that viral load into us, okay? So again, wash your hands. It is so difficult to limit route, it's outrageous, especially in this day and age with over 8 billion people in this existence. It was a whole different ball game, say 50 years ago, when there was only 3.5 billion people on the planet, okay? There just weren't that many people, okay? But if you also remember, all of a sudden Spanish flu came back into our consciousness because it was this thing that came around, and we did such a good job of controlling that even with the limited population that it infected everybody, okay? So I'm not saying these things aren't real. I'm just saying there are dire consequences associated with the fact of trying to stop these things because of the interaction of how humans work, which is that we are highly interactive people. And then I joke about it, which was, it was like, hey, stay at home, but all come and shop in the one same place. So we just bring all the route to the, yeah, you see what's going on here. So we were concentrating everything. There were things that made sense, but we also understand things a little bit differently today. We're trying to do the best we could at the time. Now, the last piece of this is immunity, okay? Now, a few things that I want to point out, okay? So with immunity, the one thing that kind of comes to the top of the list is immunizations. And what's important to recognize is that there is a difference between immunizations and vaccinations, okay? And there is also a difference between measles, mumps, rubella, diphtheria, tetanus, and flu and COVID. Because the first 5 that I mentioned are stable viruses that do not mutate, because if they do, they die. And so it's not in their benefit to mutate. So if you put an immunization in front of, so you get immunized from measles, mumps, and rubella. And what happens is that you teach your immune system through exposure, low-level exposure, of the actual virus itself, such a low level that your body goes, this thing would be a threat in big doses, kill it. And that's what we've been able to train our bodies to do through stable pathogens. But when you have the flu, when you have anything that mutates, you put a vaccination in front of it, and what does it do? It mutates in order to change itself around the vaccination. And then it is able to infect because it wants to persist. It's in its best interest to keep changing. So what did it do? It changes, loses potency, but then increases transmissibility. And that's exactly what the flu virus has been doing for decades. And I like to remind folks, COVID is an influenza. We've known it existed for some time. It's just mutated several different times since then. So, can these things, I don't even want to go there. So with immunity, this is where we begin to have control, where we begin to have some control. And so for instance, there are 4 general factors around immunity that are kind of basic things that we think are too simple. And if we don't put enough effort into them, well, our immune system gets compromised and then we can become overwhelmed easily. So, as I often joked, weddings are not necessarily super spreader events, but if you get drunk and stay up late at a wedding, you compromise your immune system, and then if somebody has a pathogen, everybody ends up with it. So there are, again, bigger pictures in terms of what's happening here. So in terms of immune support, you can't immune boost. I know they sell that, immune booster. Your immune system is as good as it can, is what it is, and how you treat it dictates how it acts. Everybody has a different immune system. Some people are more sensitive to others, so some people get compromised much easier. Okay, and so this is a difference with all of us in terms of our capacity to be able to fight off something or be infected by it. So the first thing that we deal with here is hydration. And this is 2.5 to 3.5 liters per day. Okay, minimum mandatory, that's water. That's not your tea, that's not your coffee, that's your water. Okay, flat tap water, not bubbly. I know everybody likes their fizzy water. Carbonated water does not have an uptake of the cell as well as flat tap water. So 2.5 to 3.5 liters. Generally it's 2.5 liters for women, 3.5 liters for men. Your exertion, the temperature, the elevation affect this as well. So you may have higher callings depending on the activities that you're doing, but minimum mandatory, this is for basic bodily functions. This is basically so you poop regularly, okay? And you have cellular health, okay? So you're not drying out. So hydration. 2, sleep. 7 to 9 hours a night, okay? Anybody try to function on a few hours of sleep? Okay. Okay. Here's the reality of it. When you're younger, you can get away with it. As you get older, it's gonna knock you down. You probably get a little bit sicker than you'd like to because of it as well, because you compromise the nervous system. What happens when you don't sleep, or I should say when you do sleep, you go into REM, you have 2 cycles of REM. It basically, so during the day when you interact with the environment, your subconscious takes in all of this information. Like it's literally like, oh, there's a pair of glasses here and there's this water here and oh, and he's got this page open to here. It's like cataloging everything. It's exhausting, okay? And so what your brain does at night when you go to sleep, it goes, there's a lot of worthless information in here. And it resets the whole nervous system and gets rid of this load of information, data. Okay, it's literally cleaning out your hard drive. If you don't get those 2 cycles, well, you didn't get to clean everything out from the day, and then you have an exhausted electrical system or memory system, your nervous system, and it gets overloaded with too much information. And if you do that over and over and over again, if you do it for years, it's called long-term fatigue. And ultimately, in the United States, we normalize this as productivity and as a beneficial thing to your employer, not to you. Okay, meaning we're basically, and the other thing to think about is that prepubescent children need 10 to 12 hours of sleep a night. How well does that work for the system that we've jammed them into? Not very well, especially when you throw school, sports, extracurricular activities, all of these other things into it. And then we're like, and you need to get your grades up too. And what we do is we condition children to the fact that we deprive them of sleep. And then they think it's normal as they become adults. And then as adults, we're like, oh, I don't need that much. And then you hit like 50 and you're like, fuck, I need to sleep. And you're trying to catch up for years and years, and the problem is that youth is wasted on the youth, right? And then you're trying to catch up later in life for all of these things that you wasted time on. Don't get me wrong, they're fun, but they may not be what you want, okay? So 7 to 9 hours of sleep, 7 to 9 hours of sleep. 3, nutrition. Reduce sugars. And when I say reduce sugars, basically what I'm saying is eliminate all processed food from your diet. If it doesn't rot, don't eat it. Yeah, if it doesn't rot, don't eat it. And then more importantly, actually prepare your own meals, okay? With real food, like things like fruits and vegetables. And sugar is not sugar, because fruit sugar, yes, I know there's sugar in it, but at the end of the day, it's not processed sugar. Your body reacts to it a little bit differently. I'll get into that tomorrow. The majority of the health problems that we have in this world today are based around inflammation and stress, which is all sugar, whether it's dietary or hormonal. Heart disease, diabetes, and obesity, and also senility are all sugar-related illnesses. Senility, Alzheimer's, senile, yeah, exactly. And so what we now know, it's interesting because Alzheimer's, right now, there's a faction of the medical community that's trying to classify it as type 3 diabetes. Yeah. The problem is that the medical community is like, it's not diabetes. We're like, it is. It's an insulin sugar problem. And the sugar industry is like, you're not gonna do this. We're not playing this game, okay? We already got enough people sick. We're gonna make more people sick. There's more money to be made, okay? Sugar is killing us, and it's processed foods. The other problem is that the processing is into the farming, so sourcing your food is incredibly important, because if you're buying commercial food, basically you're buying hybridized, genetically modified food that has pesticides, toxins, and preservatives built into it. Those preservatives are sugar. And ultimately, they're poisons. And as I like to remind folks, we did this for productivity. Prior to World War II, 80% of the population worked in agriculture. It took 80% of our population. We also had very little diabetes, other than type 1, because that's congenital. Heart disease was nearly non-existent, and obesity wasn't even a thing. And after World War II, today we have 1.6% of the world population works in agriculture today. So that is telling that we're creating products, but we're not creating health, because today 52% of the population in the United States has heart disease. 52% is obese, 54% has heart disease, and over 60% is diabetic, pre-diabetic, or undiagnosed diabetic. You have to leave Jackson Hole to get a realization of what's going on in this world, okay? We're in a bubble. The last thing is lifestyle. And a few things to recognize. Sometime outside with somebody every day. When you're outside, you get vitamin D, okay? The problem that we have is that we wear too many clothes because we're in a northern latitude, and so we get vitamin D and we concentrate it on our face, and then we get melanoma, we get skin cancer, and people are like, sun causes cancer. No, it doesn't. Too much concentration in one spot. Get naked, people. Get naked, expose yourself, and then expose yourself appropriately, which is for shorter periods of time in the beginning. You'll take a little bit longer than everybody else.
It has changed for me as I've grown older and I've spent more time outside. I don't burn it easily.
Exactly, and it's interesting because the more you expose yourself to it, the less of a problem it becomes, but it has to be appropriate exposure, right? And what do people do? They don't go outside enough, and then they go on vacation. They're like, I'm gonna go outside, and then they just get scorched.
And they douse themselves with toxins.
Yes, because sunscreen causes cancer. Absolutely, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Zinc is your only product. If you work in the outdoor industry and you need to put something on, generally I tell you to wear clothes, okay? Get a big hat, get long sleeves on, right? If you wanna hide from the sun, or get adequate exposure, expose yourself appropriately. If you do need to wear sunscreen, zinc is the only thing you should be putting on your body. a zinc product, because everything else has a cancer-causing agent when it interacts with UV. Interesting. But that's what the research shows us, and the problem is that when I speak to the general public, they're like, that can't possibly be. And I'm like, well, do you read research? And they're like, well, it doesn't matter. Why would they put a product out that does that? Because it makes a lot of money. It's cheap, and we've got people bought into a story. The other thing, so sometime outside with somebody every day, the relationships that you create keep you sane, okay? The more you interact with people, and then specifically, the more people you interact with around appropriate touch, the lower your blood pressure. Yeah, imagine that. So as I like to remind people, people are like, you're a hugger. I'm like, who damaged you? I am a hugger. And don't get me wrong, like I say that tongue in cheek, but the problem is that there is a reality to that. It's horrible. It's a shame, right? And what's happened is that we have an environment where people do have inappropriate touch, and then therefore other people get afraid because of it. That's not happening to the majority of people. It happens to an isolated group. The problem is that we extrapolate it to a bigger population, and it's making us sick because everybody in here is dying for human interaction. You do, right? That's why you're here. It's why you're in the group. It's why you're having so much fun with one another. Right? When we start lifting and moving everybody, you got to really touch people. And by the way, that's the other reason why we wear gloves, okay? Because when we interact with somebody in a medical situation, it's a little creepy when we go skin to skin. So we put a barrier in there which allows people to have a little bit higher level of comfort, okay? The one thing that I will throw out to you though is that in 32 years of dealing with heart attacks, fatalities, some pretty gruesome situations and some heartbreaking situations, every time I've ever dealt with a fatality and there was a survivor, and I was managing a survivor, there's never been one time where the survivor hasn't looked at me and said, can I hold your hand? Why? Because they just lost something that mattered to them. They lost a relationship, and what do they want? They want the compassion of another human being to know that they're not alone. And they want the human touch. And so when you touch people appropriately, you lower their heart rate, lower their respiratory rate, you lower their anxiety, and you increase oxytocin into their bloodstream, which causes them to bond with you, which means that you matter as a human being to them. That's the hormonal response. The less interaction we have physically, the less oxytocin that we create, and the more we believe we can do it alone. And that's a bias that's based off of a rhetoric, but then magnified because we eliminate that hormonal response. So make no mistake about it. Human interaction is key. It's what causes us to be healthy. I joke about it. I've been struggling around my health for the last 10 months on some weird things. But the one thing that does me wonders is getting back into a group of people. Why? Because I get your energy. I throw a little bit of mine out there, but then I get yours back. And what it does is it reminds me that I'm not alone, and it causes me to have hormonal responses that make me feel better, even though I have this underlying thing that's driving me wild. And so just keep these things in mind, because this is what you have control over. You don't have much control over this stuff, okay? All right. Questions, comments? Okay. BSI. The next thing under BSI was what? Scene safety. Scene safety. Now, if the environment is difficult to manipulate, how do we manage patients in the environment in order to improve their safety, improve their position? What do we do? If I'm lying face down with my nose in the freaking dirt, what are you going to do with me? You're gonna try to get me comfortable. You're gonna move me, right? Okay. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna step outside and we're gonna start doing lifting and moving. This is the foundation of this course, okay? Because in the wilderness environment, it's pretty much all we do is move people. We have to, okay? There's emergency and urgent moves, okay? Write this down. Emergency moves, okay? Emergency moves. What are they? When a patient has a life or limb threat that is dictated by their position, when there is a life or limb threat that is dictated by their position and it's imminent, we move the individual with disregard to further injury. We just try to save their life. We're not worried about making it worse. Those are rare, although sometimes we have to do it, okay? And then we have urgent moves. What are urgent moves? Urgent moves are where we protect the patient from further injury, and they're generally resource dependent. Okay. The big takeaway is that in an urban environment, when an ambulance shows up, there's 3 people on that ambulance, and then they have mechanized equipment in order to always do urgent moves. They don't do emergency moves. You know who does emergency moves? Law enforcement and fire department when they first come up on scene, and they're like, we don't get them out of there, they're gonna die, and we won't have a patient for the medics to deal with. And then when the medics show up, they're like, great, nice secure scene, awesome. We'll deal with it from here. And then they will take spinal precautions and they will move people appropriately, but they do it with a mechanized approach. For us in the wilderness, sometimes there's a blurry line between urgent and emergency because we often don't have enough resources, so there's a good enough in between, okay? And so with that, what we're gonna do is we're gonna go outside, we're gonna start running you through some emergency moves, and then we're gonna run you through a host of urgent moves in order to be able to help you understand how to move folks, and that's gonna be your baseline for being able to move people for the rest of the course, okay? All right, sound good?
Yeah.
Okay, right on. How you guys feeling?
Good.
You just feel good? What do you feel?
Excited.
Okay, I like that. What else do you feel? Nervous? I like that. A little anxious? Okay, what else is anybody feeling? I just want to remind folks, that's what's real. That's what's real. How you're feeling is real. Everything else is some bullshit construct. How you doing? I'm good. That's why people don't ask me how I'm doing, because I give them a very long answer. Well, you know, it's complicated. Okay? The problem is we don't make time for people in order to validate how they feel, because it takes time. It takes too much time away from productivity. That takes away from the human condition. It also takes away from our existence. So just recognize how you're feeling is incredibly important. It's mostly important to you because nobody else can change that state but you. Okay, other people affect it because we interact, but also recognize that we're going to be responsible for ourselves with this. So with that, your safety is your problem. Okay, our biggest safety when we're lifting is a threat to your what? To your back. Excellent. So we're going to show you appropriate moves in order to be able to protect your back so that you can manage your own safety. And then I'm going to also reiterate, which is that we don't know when it's an unsafe place for you. So you need to work within your own limitations. not the expectations of the move. So if it's beyond your capabilities, speak up and own that and ask for help. That's how this works, okay? Because if you're not doing that, we're not communicating, and then we're going back to this bullshit rhetoric of, I'm good. Are we good? Nobody gets my joke. Okay, Z.
Before we jump outside, we just have someone that joined us in the class. I'd love to